Good morning, everyone, to our Wednesday Fireside Reflections. And together again. And by the way, once again, we love to hear a lot of your comments, your feedback afterwards. And I'm glad that you are appreciating this. This is week 9, and week 9 of the abnormal becoming normal. Except, you know what? It just doesn't feel completely normal still. And it really would be sad if it did feel normal. But today we have a wonderful passage from the letter of James, which I hadn't been, I hadn't been all that familiar before. Laura found it. She said, "What do you think?" And I absolutely love it. And as we will be talking about, it's like it. I want to say like everything, but that's not true. It's not exactly like everything, but it's so incredibly rich. It's packed full and beautiful. So we are going to start. I'm going to read it, and then Laura has some reflections, and then we're going to go back and forth a little bit. So this is the letter of James, and it's chapter 1 and verses 2 through 8. And he starts off saying, "My dear family, when you find yourselves tumbling into various trials and tribulations, learn to look at it with complete joy, because you know that when your faith is put to the test, what comes out is patience. What's more, you must let patience have its complete effect, so that you may be complete and whole, not falling short in anything. And if any one of you falls short in wisdom, they should ask God for it, and it will be given them. God, after all, gives generously and ungrudgingly to all people, but they should ask in faith with no doubts. A person who doubts is like a wave of the sea, which the wind blows and tosses about. For the doubter, being double-minded and unstable in every way, must not expect to receive anything from the Lord," which, as we'll find out, is a lot nicer than it sounds at the very end.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was going to start with. Is it's like reading an email. Like, you don't really get the intonation until you begin to study it and know the context in which it's being written and what they're saying. So,
and you know what? Sorry, but because you're going to talk about the exegesis, just since we're starting with the very last part, just to mention one little thing. That very last part, which says, don't expect it. If you don't do it, don't expect to receive anything, which, can sound harsh, but what it's really saying, it's kind of like saying, hey, if you don't practice the high jump a lot, just don't expect to be a high jumper. Don't expect to be a good high jumper when a lot of people are practicing that a lot or anything.
Yeah, that's true. And it segues actually really well into the beginning. So what we'd like to do is, give you a little what's called exegesis, so a little background to what's going on here. So what you need to remember is this letter gets written right after Pentecost. And Pentecost this year is Sunday, May 31st, and we'll be celebrating that. And Pentecost is the birthday of the church. It's the time in which Peter, who had all those struggles both while Jesus was alive and while he was going through all his trials and tribulations, so much trouble with the death, the misunderstanding during the post-resurrection, the resurrection stories, and that time. This is when he comes into his own, is on Pentecost Sunday, when he stands up and he talks to the crowds, and everybody understands him. And it's really when he begins the mission of spreading the message of Christ and God's love to the whole world. And the interesting thing is, it's for everyone. And this is a really important part of James's letter, is that James is writing this letter to everyone, to anyone who would listen. So what you need to remember too is, within a remarkably short amount of time, this movement spread across the entire known world. And it was done by two ways. It was done by the actual teachings of the apostles, and then it was done through the sharing of these letters, and these letters of the early church. And there's 4 of them, and it's James and Peter and John and Judah, and those are known as the 4 early church letters. So they would have been distributed, copied, and widely shared with all these new communities that were popping up that were looking to be, become Christian communities. So,
which also, by the way, which we've talked about before in other spots, is because they were written, they were copied, they were shared, they were distributed, means that later on we have checks and balances against, the people who say, well, people just, kind of took it, and it's kind of like, the telephone game, right? Where it just gets, because everybody in subsequent iterations, are making it up.
Or they manipulate it for their own purposes.
Exactly. It's like,
things,
you can't do that with every copy that's going out to many different countries that then later on you can compare, which they've done, and there's actually
100% accuracy.
complete accuracy.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yep. And so again, just kind of reiterating that these messages were for everyone, and these letters are kind of like short, practical, instructional pieces on and really good advice.
This is how you do faith.
This is how you do faith. This is how you live as a Christian. And it also points out that this is not going to be a problem-free existence for you. That if you become a Christian and if you begin to live the way Christ wants, you are going to run into problems. And some of it is serious problems, like they ran into, like persecution, which Christians still today throughout the world are persecuted. But it also is about lesser things. It's about I lost my train of thought when I went there.
Just dealing with problems and
life issues, financial troubles,
yeah.
Any of those kind of things that you run into. So, or problems at work with integrity questions, and it causes a problem in your life. And if you're going to deal with that in a Christian way, then it's probably going to cause you some troubles. So the other thing about James, there's 2 more important things to know about. So James uses a lot of the Old Testament wisdom writings. You see him refer back to that. And so the wisdom writings are in the Old Testament are a collection of writings by people who really worked hard to know God and to live the way God wanted them to. And so a lot of that is brought forward into Christianity because what wisdom is understanding and knowing God, kind of thing. So the other really interesting and exciting fact about James's letter is that although they can't be 100% sure, they are 99.9% sure that this is the same James who was a disciple who is known to be the brother of Jesus, which is awesomely cool. And he's also the same James who took over the Church of Jerusalem for the next 30 years. And he taught there, and he really raised Christianity to its height in Jerusalem. And it's an awesome thing to think like this. These are the words of Jesus' brother.
Jesus' brother,
and it lived on. Yeah. And they're so rich, as you said, and full of so much. So let's dive into it.
Well, and first of all, I think it's one of the most beautifully written and poetic and kind, and it's almost musical to the ear. And Liz Laura said, loaded with wisdom. The thing about wisdom, and the thing about this passage is wisdom almost always, if not maybe always, needs to be unpacked. You need to ponder it. Kind of consume it and let it have its effect. Wisdom doesn't come at you like a sledgehammer or instant solution that, somebody tells you, oh, okay, all right. And you just kind of, take it and you swallow it and you move on, and it automatically has its effect. You need to do something with it. We need to do something with it. And that's what this passage is about, which is, like all passages, the wisdom of it can just slide by unless you and to me, the wisdom here has to do with patience, and it has to do with seeing, understanding clearly, and then it has to do with faith and with practice. And I love the way it begins when he says, "My dear family," which is so loving and so kind. And then he says, when you find yourselves tumbling into various trials and tribulations, when you find yourselves, and the way that that's presented, I think, is so kind and so soft, and it's just so, it allows the vulnerability. And somebody says, well, look, when you find yourselves falling into tumbling into various trials and temptations, the way that's worded, you go, yeah, I feel that. My guess is that that's the way that a lot of us have been feeling. That kind of the tumbling, the tumbling feeling where you're not in control, kind of disoriented because your body's moving this way and that, and it's something identifiable.
Yeah, I I have to jump to the waves, so the wave part towards the end, right? Because I think that that's so symbolic, even at the beginning with the word tumbling. So like when you're in a wave, a big wave, you're disoriented. You can't find your way. You're being pushed and shoved by external forces, and I think it's interesting to remember that waves, we think of waves as maybe something that existed out in the ocean and then found its way in and then broke on the shore and that was the end, but that's not what it is. It's actually water that is under the influence of wind and tidal pressures. And when those two things impact and exert their pressure on the water, then the wave forms. And so I just think it's so fabulous here, because I think what he's saying too is when those external forces play on you and push on you and make you find yourself tumbling, don't be a wave. Don't let those external forces form you. Like you have to stay true to your own character and in wisdom and patience.
And the other beautiful thing just about a symbol, a symbol is a living thing, and once it has its own power, right? And I think about the power of the symbolism of of waves, which as you're talking, it brings to mind that like you're talking about the pressures and the forces, right? So, and we don't like pressures and we don't like forces as human beings, but I think most people, we love waves. We look at a wave and we go, oh, that's so beautiful. Did you look at the beautiful waves today? And and just think about it as if the water were saying, it's like, oh my God, this is terrible, and we're going this way and that. But but if you can also, at sometimes, I think part of the wisdom is that you can even allow yourself to to be with the wave and to not fight it. And when it's still, it's still. When it's wavy, and you can you can learn your practice even in the midst of the waves as well.
Yeah, and I think he's also saying a little bit when he's talking about doubt, that pulls into the same thing. So you can't go through life switching back and forth. I believe, I don't believe. I believe, I don't believe. I believe, I don't believe. And that's what he's talking about when he talks about being double-minded and unstable. He's not talking about some kind of moral thing or mental illness type of thing. He's talking about your faith. When you let those external forces push and pull on you, and was Jesus really the Son of God? Did that really happen? Da, 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 and you start to doubt, and your faith you get played with. Then those external forces cause you to become a wave, and that's where the ending comes in. If you allow yourself to go back and forth and to have your faith be unstable, that's going to be hard to get what God wants to give you, because and that's where don't expect to receive anything from the Lord. That's where it's hard to get God's messages, because you have to stay stable. You have to stay true to your faith, and that's where wisdom and patience come into play again.
Yeah, and this is a very holistic teaching, training passage about practice, about what do you have to do, and which brings us to the very next word, right after he says, tumbling into various trials and temptations. What do you do when you find yourself tumbling into various trials and temptation? What do you do? The next word is learn, and I love that, and which indicates, does it come naturally? Not any of the learning that I've done. Does math come naturally? Does calculus come naturally? Does biology, chemistry, anything, physics, does it come naturally? No, you have to learn it. So you have to keep going back to it, and it takes a certain discipline. And it makes me think that we talked about in at least men's group, I think last week, but is common sense really common? And I don't think so. I think a lot of common sense is actually learned. And when you call it common sense, it makes it seem like it's easier and more available than it actually is.
Maybe it should be common. Should be common sense.
Right?
I mean, that's we aspire to common sense. We don't necessarily all have common sense.
We aspire to it, but I think in terms of calling it common, or in thinking that faith is something that should just kind of be there, it undermines, it undervalues what it actually is, and it does a disservice to humanity in selling it as something that should be there. It's like, oh, everybody knows that 2 + 2 = 4. Like, no, they don't. You have to learn that. And if you say everybody knows, then to people who don't know, it's really insinuating there's something wrong with you. And I don't think that there is something wrong with you if you don't know. I think it just means that you haven't learned. And that's what this process is about. So it says, and it's talking about a completely unnatural process, which is, it says, learn to look at this tumbling into trials and temptations. Learn to look at it with joy. That is incredibly unnatural, and yet that's the gift that we want to learn. If if everybody just took trials and temptations as, oh, this is wonderful, you wouldn't need faith, you wouldn't need wisdom. It wouldn't be a step up, but this is a step up. And I think this is the part where it's a huge point of this is much of our faith is very unnatural, but it's helpful. And it's as unnatural and it is as learned, and it is as practiced, and it is as forced, and it's as intentional as exercise, as eating right versus grabbing bags of chips, and which is a problem that poor people run into. You grab the easy, ready-made, affordable food that's right there. So exercise, eating right, brushing our teeth. We teach our children to brush their teeth. It's not a natural kind of thing. It's education. Every single step of education as working, as achieving or accomplishing absolutely anything. And I think if we approached faith more like that, then we would have more an appreciation and more of a respect to it. And it's kind of like the people who we run into all the time. It's like, I got my faith, just love people. And so knowing it isn't the same as doing it.
Right, living it, sure. Yeah, and that's a big part of what he's talking about is, and that theme shows up over and over and over again. It's not just enough to have faith. If you really have faith, then you have to go help people. That's what your faith is going to drive you to do, or to live it out. And for some people, living out your faith is as simple as living a kind and loving and faithful life, and showing that, just because people are watching you, so it's not everything is like, I have to go solve all the problems of the world. Sometimes the way that you can show.
It makes me think of people who have practiced dance all of their life. And there's actually a woman, I'm not gonna say, but who was a ballet instructor for years and years and years. And even though she's in her, I think maybe 80s or so, and I'm gonna force myself to
let patience have its complete effect. So to me, the vision that came with that is like a blanket starting with my head, just a comforting blanket, like starting with my head, let my head settle, be patient, right? Down through my body, my heart, getting rid of the anxiety, like let patience just, have its complete effect. Just watch it kind of roll like a wave, through your body, both physically, I think mentally, emotionally, type of thing. Let it have its complete effect.
And don't throw it off.
It's a beautiful
Stay under
thing.
the blanket.
Stay under.
Right. blanket. Don't throw it out and go, okay, that's enough.
Yeah.
Or, the companies are selling weighted blankets now, right? The weighted blankets that kind of lie under that, for a while. And then the next says, if any of you fall short in wisdom, which of course everyone does, what do? Ask God for it, and it will be given them. So this comes.
I love that. It's so
right?
simple.
Yeah.
What do?
You just ask God.
Ask God.
Right. The
Talk to
great thing is, what does that come immediately after? Right? Comes immediately after talking for patience. Will you get it? If you ask God, if you do it with patience, which means, it's like, how patient should you be? And again, I feel like we talk about this just about every week.
Yeah.
It's been 5 minutes. I asked God, it didn't work. God didn't work. God,
It's been 2 months. We've been
God
praying about
praying
COVID-19.
about it for months now. If you look at the span of time of the world. So, so that's an interesting thing about, and this is dealing with the issue of focus and faith, and being able to choose your focus and getting knocked off course and going back to that and going back to that and going back to that. And that gets in, the next verse, it says, God, after all, gives generously and ungrudgingly to all people.
To all people. I mean, this is a recurring theme for James. All people. I want you to know this is for everyone. The doors have been opened wide. Everybody's included.
Which is an incredible gift. It's not for, which is directly opposed to the chosen few.
Right.
Just a couple people. It's opposed to esoteric learning. He's saying, look, we're making this plain. We're making this available. We're making this as accessible because that's exactly what Jesus did. It's like, I'm going to share with you the instruction manual of how you're going to find, happiness and relationships and love and stuff. Here it is, line by line. You just, check it out and you practice it. So this is available to everyone. And then he gets into kind of what we started with. You should ask with faith, ask in faith with no doubts. And I just want to go back a little bit and just mention that another aspect of what I love about this is that I think that this is actually both heady and with the heart.
Hardy.
It's heady and hearty, right? That some people, I think some people do have more of a gift of being, kind of open-hearted and just kind of diving in and having a great intuitive sense maybe of, I don't know, where God is, or what's the faithful path or something like that. You still have to practice it, but I love this that it's instructions that also go to the head too. And it's saying, here's step by step if you take it apart. So that this is both for the head and for the heart, which I really, really appreciate.
And I think that's how he's defining wisdom, right? So, you have to know God and you have to feel God. You have to take time to stop and understand who God is. And then you have to accept in God's love, God's forgiveness, God's grace into your heart, into your soul, and embrace that, learn to do that.
It's like intuitive healing. That's great. If you're an intuitive healer or something like that. But if you're also rushing to the scene of a car accident and you're an EMT, you got to know things. You've got to practice. You've got to practice things. And you may be drawn to that, naturally, but then you do have a lot to learn and to practice. And then we get back into the person who doubts is like a wave of the sea, which the blows and tosses, and it's talking again, which we started about the mind going this way and that. And to me, since I meditate, this is like the greatest sales pitch for meditation. That's saying, look, you've got to choose your focus on faith, and doubt is, and I love the description of doubt of saying, that you're kind of on it sometimes, right? Because it's not disbelief. Doubt isn't
Right.
disbelief.
No.
Like you're on it sometimes, and then sometimes your focus wavers, and we see that in sports all the time, right? Where whether somebody's playing tennis or even sprinting or whatever, they say they I kind of lost my why did you lose? Like I lost my focus for just just a short amount of time, and but the more we can practice that, which again unnatural, has to be practiced. People say, well, I'm no good at that. It's like, yeah, that's the point. That's the point. It doesn't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah.
So you can either have, and I love the description of an untrained dog that just kind of jumps everywhere and does whatever it wants, and that could be your mind. Or you can say, you know what, I want to train mine for patience, for faith, train it to be positive, which I'm going to be talking about the next time I preach on May 31st, I think it is. But it's about training your mind. It's so that you're not double-minded,
right,
and so that it's not unstable.
And you keep reminding yourself. I mean, and that's a practice. I mean, meditation is one, and then remind yourself of these things often. So and then change the direction. Last night we were reading or saw a story about a man who got caught in a riptide and pulled out to sea, and that's so sad, and it's natural human behavior to fight a riptide, to fight something that has got you. But to survive a riptide, you have to swim along with the thing that is causing you danger. You have to go with it with patience and wisdom, because you have to look to the shore and keep your mind on staying parallel to the shore until you pass, because riptides are short. They're not long things. So if you can just ride it out, then you'll get through it. And I think that's true with our problems too. I think when we have those tumbling moments, if we stop with patience and wisdom and faith and look at it, they're not as long as as when we become double-minded and give in to them and make them bigger than they are, and then they become huge waves that can destroy. And I think that's a beautiful thing about waves too, is we love on a beautiful day to watch gentle waves, or on days when we watch a surfer surfing a wave, and we love them, and they're sparkly and diamonds, and we love waves. And then a storm comes.
I love to watch water getting pressure.
Yeah, right, to do beautiful things. But then a storm comes and we curse waves, because they are powerful and dangerous and cause great destruction. And so I think he's beautiful. It's just such a beautiful
beyond
image. And they don't even have, I mean, he's talking about waves on the Sea of Galilee, and it's just, it's crazy, or waves on the oceans beside. But I mean, either way, everyone there would understand the wave action kind of thing. I think it's just beautiful.
And I love you lifting up the about the riptide. It's because it's probably learning how to deal with that is probably one of the most unnatural, unintuitive things that you would ever come up with.
Yeah,
it's
sure.
totally unintuitive to go, you know what, don't freak out, just kind of go with it, go parallel with the shore, 90%, don't try to swim directly against it. And that that's a beautiful metaphor for life that has to deal with this too.
Yeah, it's good. So speaking of riptides and problems that we run into and kind of things, we also included a poem by Helen Steiner Rice. Helen Steiner Rice being just a prolific and well-known American author. She was a poet. She wrote greeting card lines. Her poems were read by Aladdin on the Lawrence Welk show, if you remember that. And she just was fabulous. So she was born in 1900, and her dad died in the influenza epidemic of 1918. when, I thought of this poem and did a little research on her. But she was an early advocate for women's rights. She had corporate jobs. She worked in the utility company business, and she became this really important person for women in the workforce kind of thing. She organized campaigns for women's, improving women's work conditions and women's pay rights and everything. And then, but her life just, it continued to have tragedies. She got married, and the depression came, and the stock market crashed, and her husband of 3 years lost everything and ended up killing himself. And so she had to go through that, and she came out of it with a deeper and stronger faith, which you can hear in everything that she writes. She's just amazing. I think it said over 7 million copies of her books have been sold, and I mean, talk about a way to send your faith around the world too. But she talks about her religious faith. I mean, when you hear them, you can hear this faith. So we'll close out with one of these that I just love, called "Climb Till Your Dream Comes True." Often your tasks will be many and more than you think you can do. Often the road will be rugged and the hills insurmountable too. But always remember, the hills ahead are never as steep as they seem. And with faith in your heart, start upward and climb till you reach your dream. For nothing in life that is worthy is never too hard to achieve if you have the courage to try it and you have the faith to believe. For faith is a force that is greater than knowledge or power or skill, and many defeats turn in triumph if you trust in God's wisdom and will. For faith is a mover of mountains. There's nothing that God cannot do. So start out today with faith in your heart and climb. See, it's going to make you cry because I'm such a up. And climb till your dream comes true. It's just so beautiful.
From one who knows, from one who lived it.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
So may we all practice it, may we all live it.
Yeah.
And may we all reap the rewards, Tim. This is the time when we need it. Lord's Prayer.
Sure. Let's join together.
Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Have a great
day
and rest of the week. And we'll see you on Sunday.
Right.
Actually, we'll talk a little bit. Sunday, it's Memorial Day weekend. We're going to take a little time off. Les Miller is going to be in the pulpit. He's phenomenal. Don't miss him.
Right.
And Allie will be assisting him in all other parts of the service.
And I will say, after Les speaks, a lot of times I can't, a number of people say, "Oh, darn it, I miss Les. I wish I wouldn't have missed him." And the people who heard him is like, "Oh, you're so good." So so tune in.
And if you did miss it, don't worry, because it'll be posted on our YouTube channel, live stream SCC, and you can watch it anytime.
So have
Take
a great
care.
Memorial Day weekend.